Yeah, latest episode of You Had to Be There. Broadcaster and journalist Lee McKenzie. Very good morning. How are you?
I said that I might win tickets to Leopardstown, although I'm not sure if I qualify for that.
I'd say we could hook you up with some.
We could. Lee, before we get into your picks, and remarkable picks they are, I have to say, we should mention the book, Inside F1. I know we spoke to you about the book a number of weeks ago. This is a book with a foreword by David Coulthard and chapters on your experiences of and the careers of some top Formula 1 drivers: Schumacher, Hamilton, Vettel, Verstappen, Alonso, Massa and Button. How's the book process been for you? It's quite cathartic, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. It's still odd when I'm trying to do my Christmas shopping and then you see a book in the shop, which I suppose is quite exciting. But for me, I just, I've grown up in sport. I love Formula One. A couple of the stories from the book are actually my picks of today. It's surreal, really, but I'm pleased I did it. It was a bit of a labour of love, and then it just becomes a bit of a labour, and then when it's done and out there, you think, thank God, I do love it again.
People who want to get the book into the stockings, I'd imagine they can get it in the usual places.
Yeah, it's on sale across Ireland as well, which is great. So no, it's been well received. I've not been sued by any of the drivers yet, so I'm counting that as a win.
Lee, you've had the honour and privilege of attending a lot of different sporting events in your capacity as a broadcaster and TV presenter and journalist across a number of different codes. So we might get into your picks. So this is You Had to Be There. We asked guests to pick 5 events where there was a standout performance and some, just a memorable event that you've attended at some point in your life. So we might go in order, I'd imagine, chronologically. And I think we're going to start in 2008 with the Brazilian Grand Prix. Maybe remind people who kind of have forgotten this in the annals of history. 2nd November 2008, Felipe Massa wins the race, but there are other stories going on here.
There were so many different subplots, and this is one from the book, but basically it'd just been a surreal weekend. It was my first weekend ever working for BBC. I'd been held at gunpoint on the way to the racetrack, so it already started off as a really random thing. David Coulthard's last Grand Prix, and then we had ultimately
We might just get you back in 1 second there, Lee. Your line is just breaking up ever so slightly. We'll be back to you in just a moment. Some crazy stories.
Well, that's not a great start to your career. Held at gunpoint.
100%. And this is, having read Lee's book, it's one of the stories within it, like being held at gunpoint on the way to the Brazilian Grand Prix. And this is at Interlagos near Sao Paulo, and it's manic. You imagine how big Sao Paulo is, but even getting to the track, and they have to have security and that sort of thing as well. So quite a scary start to your journalism career, I'd imagine, especially when you've probably covered events like Wimbledon and rugby matches. To go then to a Formula 1 race in the middle of a fairly scary part of Brazil has to be quite different. So yeah, not an easy thing for Lee to have done, but yeah, certainly that race in particular probably stands out to a lot of Formula 1 fans. 2008. I think we have Lee back on the line out there now. Lee, you were saying a very scary thing. You were saying you were held at gunpoint.
Yeah, I hadn't just been shot whilst I was saying these words. It was dramatic. We headed into the Grand Prix. Ultimately, it came down to Felipe Massa against Lewis Hamilton. This, of course, is the race where Felipe thought he had won the Grand Prix. He thought he'd won the World Championship. But the race was still going on. The Grand Prix was still going on behind him. Lewis Hamilton had to finish in 5th. Timo Glock was on the wrong tyres, and Lewis did it. Now, for Felipe to be a world champion in his mind, the garage was celebrating, his family were celebrating. Felipe's tears of joy suddenly became a bit of a nightmare, and he was just inconsolable. He realised that he hadn't achieved his dream. It was just heartbreaking for him. Lewis had achieved his. It was his first world championship. I was in the pit lane. It was pouring with rain. We were running between garages. Nobody really knew at that time what was going on, but it was just an incredible moment.
That must be fairly manic in the pit lane. Like when you're covering it from that level, you're seeing the strain on the different teams' faces, and you're trying to decide where you want to be for the checkered flag. Not easy to cover.
not easy to cover, and there's also still cars coming down the pit lane and people are everywhere, and it's, it can be quite a dangerous thing, but to be in amongst it in that moment, it was a moment that transcended the sport. You just knew that it was much bigger than somebody winning and somebody losing. Ultimately, that's what the history books will say. But to be in there in that moment was just a surreal experience. And for me, the most emotional sporting event that I've ever been part of.
Probably emotional in some ways, I guess, because of location. You've got the Brazilian fans who have a skin in the race as well. Like they want Massa to do it. And I guess when, as you say, he crosses the line as the race winner, and they see how far back Hamilton was at that particular moment. I know it was close, but they must have all believed. And then it goes from joy to pure devastation for the fans.
Yeah, and Timo Glock, who is the guy who Lewis overtook for that position, still, I don't know why I'm laughing, he's a great friend of mine, but still gets death threats and abuse every time in the lead up to the Brazilian Grand Prix. He's like, oh God, not this again. Because he is part of this, like it or not, he has become part of this huge story around it. But the atmosphere at the Brazilian Grand Prix is always incredible just because of the fans. They don't really need an excuse to have a party and make noise. You add in their local driver who could win a world title, and the thing was just off the charts. Where
does Sao Paulo rank in terms of the enjoyment now, being held at gunpoint aside? I guess it's one of those tracks that's quite unfortunate, isn't it? But it must be a lot of fun to have the Brazilian atmosphere there as well.
It is. I think when you're in the racetrack, you love it. It's a great circuit. Interlagos is, between lakes, so there's a great atmosphere. Everything else going around it and getting to it can be a little bit frenetic. We don't travel in team kit or anything. You don't put your sticker on the window. You're in bulletproof cars. So there is an element of danger about it, without a doubt. But when you're actually there, it is one of the greatest atmospheres that you will ever feel in Formula One.
I'm loving reading some of the comments here from before the race. So the build-up was juicy because everyone knew what was at stake, Lee. But Eddie Jordan, bit of controversy before the race. He was these quotes are brilliant. He says, if Massa tries to take him out, as he did in Japan, him being Hamilton, in order to steal the title, then Lewis has to be ready for it. If he tries that on, then Lewis has to turn his wheel into Massa to ensure he does not finish the race either. He has to take his wheel off. Like...
there is an insight into EJ.
Yeah, but it builds up, and some people they were controversial comments at the time, but some people can probably see that attitude that you got to do anything to win Formula One.
Well, you could say that in any sport, but there are also rules. If you do you want to be known for that? That's the sort of thing that what's the benefit in that? That will bring us into later on. We'll talk about Abu Dhabi 2021. Max Verstappen didn't need to finish that race to be crowned world champion. But it's almost a bit of a slur. It's a bit insulting to other people's talents if you say the only way you can win a race is to deploy sort of dirty tactics. So I think EJ's a little bit off on that one.
So that's your first addition to the You Had to Be There segment, 2008 Brazilian Grand Prix, and a great one at that. We'll move on to 2015, Lee. So this is Wimbledon. A lot of people over here will have I guess seen you on the Wimbledon coverage down the years on the television as well. This was Dustin Brown against Rafa Nadal, an upset on the 2nd of July 2015, but remarkable from your point of view in terms of who you watched the match with, I think.
Yeah, I've probably seen better tennis matches around the world, and certainly at Wimbledon. And I've been lucky enough to, I go onto court to interview the winner of each match. And I've definitely been part of really big ones, Federer, Nadal in a semi-final where everything rides on it. But what was so surreal about this one is that Rafa had been in this sort of pattern of going out of Wimbledon early. And in the second round, he met Dustin Brown, who was 102 in the world. And
I think we're just losing your line again there slightly, Lee. Sorry, we'll be back to you in just a moment. It's a pity, because obviously great stories from Lee there, but we'll have to come back when the line is just picked up the gremlins. There's robotic noises, I guess is how you describe it.
You don't know what's going on there.
It's brilliant though. Imagine watching a Wimbledon match.
I'm dying to go to Wimbledon. That's definitely one of the things.
You haven't been either.
It's on my list. No,
right. No. It's definitely the bucket list. Strawberries and cream. It probably has to be centre court. I don't know how expensive tickets are for Wimbledon, but it's one of those sporting events that I definitely, if it's financially feasible to get a good ticket, and I'm sure it is, you probably get what you pay for, but you want to be at a good match as well. You don't want to be at a... Well, there's not going to be any duds on centre court.
It's unlikely, yeah.
So it's certainly one of those sporting events I'd like to go to. Like, I won't bring up the Spa Grand Prix, but that's also one, Brazil. I mean, if you're gonna get to a Grand Prix,
Brazil would be better than Spa.
It would be, yeah. And as she said, it was pissing rain in Brazil in that year in 08 as well. So ironically, that's why a lot of people pick Spa, because you get the rain, you get the bit of excitement of the treacherous driving conditions. You don't want it to be dangerous for drivers, but you want a bit of crack. You want a bit of slipping and sliding and a bit of action.
We're just moving over to Zoom to try and prevent that from happening again. Back to the Rice Grealish debate. Any English player we've ever had wouldn't have got near an England team. They would have left us for dry if they were good enough, says Dobbs. One solution to the Rice Grealish dilemma would be to stop picking English players for Ireland. I think it's very, very straightforward, very binary, very black and white. No room for anybody to change their mind as they learn about their heritage or identity, because that's all stuff that we are impacted by environmentally, as opposed to you're not born that. You develop and evolve how you think and your opinions and your beliefs and what you really want.
And we've had plenty of players, great players for Ireland over the years, born in England, who decided they were Irish. Not decided they were Irish. They were Irish because they had Irish links and heritage, of course. We have Lee McKenzie back, I think, on the line.
Yeah.
The Zoom no doubt will work better. Sometimes it can do. Sorry, Lee, you were talking about Dustin Brown against Rafa Nadal and the absolute. I'd be bragging about this from the Hilters if I was sitting beside Roger Federer in Wimbledon, but quite a moment for you.
Yeah, what happens when you're doing these interviews is that you're never just concentrating on one game. If Roger Federer suddenly wants to get interviewed at 2:20 and you're actually doing the match on centre court, I still have to run off and interview Roger or any player. And he could see that my eye line kept drifting off, and he was like, "Are you covering this match as well?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I am." He said, "Do you know much about Dustin?" Now, Dustin Brown was 102 in the world. He'd actually beaten Rafa the year before on grass, but he wasn't a player that we really knew too much about. He was very good on grass as a surface, but Roger said, "Well, I'll tell you what, look, let me talk you through some of this." And I was like, "Are you sure?" And he was like, "He's in 2 shots time, he's going to place the ball here." And Dustin Brown's quite a trick player. He's got some, he had some great sort of, shots, tweeners and all that kind of thing. And Roger was right on every single one. So Dustin Brown ultimately beats Rafa Nadal. But for me, it wasn't even just the moment of the match. It was being able to sit there with Roger Federer, who is talking me through how this guy plays and why Rafa isn't able to get into a rhythm. It was like the best commentary I've ever been part of. And he was so generous with his time. Because I think actually the thing was that Roger was very keen to watch the match as well and probably didn't want to be interviewed by me at the time. So it was just a really surreal situation, a really special moment.
You've spoken to us before. It was around the book, I think, Inside F1. We were talking about Michael Schumacher and visiting him at his residence. That must be quite special to sit down with people like Federer, like Schumacher, who are above their sport. They're icons globally.
Yeah, I think so. It doesn't happen very often. I mean, I interviewed these guys all the time. I was lucky enough to know Michael reasonably well and go to his house on several occasions. Once took a horse over to compete at a reining competition that they had there. But to spend time with Roger, for some reason, I think it's because I don't see them day in, day out. I do Wimbledon, it's once a year. For Formula One, you see these guys 23 times a year. So rightly or wrongly, the sparkle comes off a little bit. But Roger, to me, is the ultimate athlete. How he conducts himself on and off the court, I think, is what everybody should be aiming for. So to spend a bit of time with him, and he's so generous with his time, not just to me, but to everyone. He goes around, shakes all the cameraman's hand and everything like that. And he makes everyone feel very special.
I think a lot of people shed a tear, and Roger shed a tear himself when he made that retirement announcement. Just one of those moments that sent chills up your spine watching himself and Nadal together. And they've had so many moments on the court, but clearly emotional for both of them.
And to have greats alongside each other, I think that's how you sort of appreciate what a great is. Sometimes they stand alone and then somebody, they retire and then somebody else comes along. But we've been so blessed in tennis to have so many quality players battling out against each other. And I think that's really the measure of what a great is.
A superb addition to You Had to Be There. So 2015, Dustin Brown beating Rafa Nadal at Wimbledon, and of course made special by Roger Federer being there as well. 2018, Ireland beating the All Blacks for the very first time at home. So I guess we remember it for Jacob Stockdale's performance in particular. 29 points to 20, 17th of November 2018. It's actually hard to believe it's 4 years ago at this point, Lee.
Yeah, it was. I was presenting all the Ireland autumn matches as well as the Champions Cup for Channel 4, and it was our first year really doing that. I'd done a lot of rugby for BBC and things, but to be able to go a couple of years before that, Ireland had won in Chicago against the All Blacks, but they'd never done it at home. I was with Peter Stringer and Joe Rocococo and Jamie Heaslip, and to be pitchside with these guys for such a huge match, regardless, for such a huge moment as it turned out to be, was really special. There were so many standouts. The Irish pack were so good, particularly in that first half. Johnny Sexton got 11 points. Jacob Stockdale's try was out of this world, chip and chase. He just was, sublime. But also, the All Blacks didn't score a try. It was the first time in 23 tests that they weren't able to score a try. That was a huge deal. To be there and be part of that was so special. I mean, it's strange, isn't it, how things have played out, because you almost go, Ireland All Blacks, Ireland will probably do it. I mean, those words hadn't really been said before then. And it's just been an incredible time for Irish rugby generally. But to be there for that first home win over the ABs was special.
Yeah, I think we'll be talking about that match in Ireland for quite some time. And it's funny because sometimes the Aviva Stadium gets a little bit of criticism for the atmosphere being a little bit stale. Usually it's in the football internationals, but that night I wasn't there in the Aviva, but you could feel it through the TV. The stadium must have been shaking.
Yeah, and it was a Saturday night, a late night kickoff. I actually started the programme because I think we were up against Strictly Come Dancing, like either The Voice or X Factor or something like that. And I actually started off the programme by saying, sport, this is the best form of reality TV you're ever going to get. And that's exactly how it played out. The atmosphere was wonderful. I always like the atmosphere at the Aviva. I don't think it matters if I'm there for, a Champions Cup match or an Ireland International. I think it's great because it's going to fill out, it's going to sell out because it's smaller than a lot of the others. But I think it's a great partisan crowd, but also a welcoming crowd. I think when you go there, not being Irish, I think you never feel out of place. I think it's very welcoming.
Just reading one of the reports, Robert Kitson, I think it was, in the Guardian, writing on that night as well, saying at times it felt like one of those old school heavyweight bouts, Ali versus Foreman, the whole world watching, body shots, shuddering, and that was a point as well. It was one of those nights where the physicality was unbelievable.
From the start, I mean, like when you even just have to watch like the first 5 minutes and it is non-stop. And let's not forget, like Ireland crossed the line on 2 other occasions. CJ Stander, Rob Kearney, both those tries weren't allowed. I mean, Wayne Barnes, it was one of those ones where you're like, is Wayne Barnes the ref going to get out of here tonight alive? But he did. It was absolutely fine. But, Ireland were absolutely up for it. And to have 2 disallowed tries, imagine what we'd have been talking about it as the greatest sporting moments if they'd had another 12 or 10 or 14 points.
And it like any time you're ahead against New Zealand in a match, no matter which country you are, you're always expecting that rally in the second half. And that rally came from the All Blacks that night, as it inevitably would. But Ireland just managed to hold it off. The defence from Ireland's perspective was impeccable.
Yeah, you should try being Scottish. I mean, like every time that we're ahead in most sporting events until like the last quarter or something, you're thinking there's going to be a comeback. That tends to be exactly what happens. But this night, at the Aviva, you just had a feeling that Ireland could do it because they had been so impressive. Because it's the All Blacks, you never rule them out. You're absolutely correct. But I just always sensed that Ireland would be able to do it on that occasion.
And the Stockdale try you mentioned, 48 minutes on the clock. It is the standout moment of that match, and holding New Zealand to no tries, as you say, was remarkable. But that moment for someone, usually in a game like that, it stands out for a performance or for someone standing up and putting their hand up and saying, "Well, I'm going to take this game by the scruff of the neck." And at that moment, as you say, it was the manner of the try as well. Jacob Stockdale really stood up.
And everyone, absolutely, Jacob was, just incredible. There were also a lot of people that did really good things. Like Peter O'Mahony put in an incredible try-saving tackle that would have, could have changed the game had New Zealand gone in. But even right until the end, the clock had gone red. New Zealand were in it was the 16th phase of play or something before. Can't remember if it was Sam Whitelock or Brodie Retallick or someone just knocked it on, and that was it. And then the place went absolutely wild. But every player put in an incredible performance. Whether it be, we talk about Stockdale because he was the one that went over for that outstanding try, but across the board, everyone was just at the maximum level.
So we're sticking with rugby, Lee, for your next inclusion. So it's 2021 England versus Scotland in the Six Nations, and I mean, as a Scot, you had to include this one. It's fair enough. So it's 6th of February 2021.
This
England
is an interesting one.
Go on.
It is, but I've been at better matches without a shadow of a doubt. I kind of prefer the one in 19 where Scotland, I think, were something like 25 points down at half-time. It ended up, I think, 36 all. I interviewed Gregor Townsend afterwards, who I know, and he said, God, I thought you would have left at half-time. And I was like, I thought you might have gone at half-time as well. But what was so special about 2021, even though it wasn't a great game, was that we were in the COVID times. So in actual fact, and there was an article about it afterwards, Scotland had waited 38 years to beat England at Twickenham. And there were only 12 Scottish people, including myself, who weren't connected with the team, who were in Twickenham, an 80,000-seater stadium. So selfishly, I put this one in, not really because it was a classic match. Yes, we won, and it was incredible to sort of break that up. But at the same time, for me to be there and see this when nobody else was able to, I realised what a privileged position that I was in, because Scottish people had waited so long for this moment and they weren't allowed to be part of it for obvious reasons. So that's really why I've included that one.
Less Scottish people in the crowd than there were on the pitch. That's remarkable.
And we were all working. So, what was also strange was, when you talk about, expecting comebacks and things like that, it was a really odd match. I mean, there wasn't another point scored after 48 minutes. So you could tell it wasn't a classic. But at the same time, there was no atmosphere. So you didn't really know where you were in the match. When you build up and then halftime happens. But there was no ebb and flow. There was no sort of quietening down of the English crowd because they were unhappy about how their team were playing. It just sort of crept up on you. I remember looking down at the clock and then saying to someone, God, this is over in 2 minutes. Scotland could actually win this. Because you sometimes need the crowd to take you on that journey throughout a match. And there just was none of that. And it was so eerie. You could hear the refs' calls, as you could hear the line-out calls, the players talking to each other. And it was just very surreal.
Quite special for a broadcaster like yourself to get that experience. I know it was in tough circumstances given COVID, and we always prefer when crowds are there. But to be in that environment where you're at a Six Nations match, this isn't a behind closed doors game necessarily in terms of a friendly. This is a game with so much on the line, and you can hear all the calls. That just adds to the experience, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I did one at Llanelli's ground, a Wales-Scotland match. They decided to use that one instead, and you're much closer then, so you can hear absolutely everything. It was really odd, but you feel like you're just at a sort of training game. And then you remember that millions of people outside of this little, world that we're in are watching this. So yeah, it was a very odd experience, but it's one that I realised how privileged I was to actually be there to see Scotland getting that. I was going to say incredible win. It was incredible that they won, but it certainly wasn't a classic rugby match.
Just reading here, it was the 150th anniversary of the fixture as well, a famous fixture, England and Scotland. It's just like history just came together for the Scots on that night. And Cameron Redpath, brilliant. Stuart Hogg, captain of the team, was brilliant. But Finn Russell as well, pulling the strings.
Yeah, Finn put in some great kicks, just kept moving the ball around. I mean, in true Finn mercurial style, he did get a yellow card as well. So he left the field for 10 minutes. But there's a reason why he plays with that freedom, and he just kicks around, the ball moves it around, puts puts people in a position where they can score a try, like Duhan van der Merwe did. He actually went over, thought he'd got it down, hadn't got it down, and then scored a little bit later on. But it was an odd one. But Billy Vunipola got a yellow as well. So there were times where it was like 14 against 15 and then vice versa. But yeah, it was, I don't know if anyone at any point was really in command of it. But Scotland sort of just hung on the best, I think, ultimately.
Yeah, incredible win for Scotland. 11-6 to break, as you say, that 38-year Ducks. That's your fourth entry for You Had to Be There this week. The final one, Lee, you mentioned earlier on, but all Formula 1 fans, and even people who maybe haven't followed the sport or only have since Drive to Survive, will remember the end of the 2021 season in Abu Dhabi. It was Max Verstappen against Lewis Hamilton. It was all on the line, and I mean, it seemed like it was going fairly normally until shit hit the fan.
Yeah, that perfectly sums it up. I mean, I still struggle with this. It still puzzles me. It doesn't mean to say I don't think Max deserved it, because he had won, more races, more pole positions. If neither of those drivers had finished the race, Max would have been world champion. But the manner in which it was won, the manipulation, or the way that the safety car came out, let 5 cars through, then stop, it was just a mess. None of us could believe what we were seeing. We were all standing. I just remember all of us standing there looking at each other like, what is happening? And with David Coulthard, Mark Webber, these guys, and everyone was sort of shocked silence. Not because, as I say, Max had won or Lewis had lost, but it had been quite a steady race. Lewis had been in command. Nicholas Latifi had a crash. They brought out the safety car. And from then on, it was just madness ensued. And yeah, it's a hard one to sort of square off. That's why, for me, 2008 Brazil will always be much more dramatic than 2021 Abu Dhabi, because that is, Brazil 2008 is a true sense of what sport is, whereas Abu Dhabi 21 for me was just, I don't know, it was just a mess, really. Left
a bad taste in the mouth, I think, for a lot of people, no matter which side of the support you're on.
Yeah.
And there was a fall guy, as you said, in Team O'Glock in 2008. Nicholas Latifi kind of became the fall guy in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, and everyone crashes. That's the thing. It's not like he went out there and did it deliberately. He was wanting to finish that race, finish off the season, go for a couple of drinks, have a nice time. But it ultimately didn't work out that way for him. But he's by no means responsible for what happened. That's on the FIA. That was on Michael Massey. Nicholas was only responsible for, pissing off his team as his car hit the wall. End of story. What happened after that is out of his hands.
Well, listen, it's been a brilliant edition of You Had to Be There. You've been in some extraordinary positions because of your work, no doubt. So 08 Brazilian Grand Prix, 2015 sitting beside Roger Federer, as you like, for a Wimbledon match. Yeah. Dustin Brown beating Nadal. 2018 Ireland beating the All Blacks at home. 2021 behind closed doors, of course, England against Scotland in the Six Nations, and the 2021 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Like Hamilton and Verstappen are two of those chapters in the book, so people can get their hands, as we said, on Inside F1 and all the usual spots.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many other ones. I had like best mate winning the first Gold Cup in 2002. You don't think you're going to get to 5, and before you know it, you're at 10 or something. Yeah. So it's been a real pleasure to be part of. It's been great. So thank you very much, and thanks for your patience as well in the dodgy sort of connection as well.
Not a problem. We got there in the end. Lee, thanks a million as always. That is Lee McKenzie.
Thank you so much, guys. Merry Christmas.
Latest episode, Merry Christmas to yourself. You Had to Be There in the books.